everyone. Welcome back to Thought Crime, Keto and Crime, and the Keto Comic, picking up with part 2 of the Holly Bobo case. As you'll recall last time, and I do apologize for being a little bit late, it took more research than I thought, so it took me an extra day to get this done. I do apologize. I am still near St. Augustine, Florida. We'll be going home later this week, but anyway, let's get back into it. As you recall from the last time, we went over the disappearance of Holly Bobo, which happened April 13th, 2011. We went through the timeline of that, which showed that she was awake, safe at home from approximately 4:30 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. when some circumstances came about that her brother was awakened by their barking dog. A neighbor heard a scream that he thought was coming from the Bobo residence, which led him to call his mom, who then reached out and called Karen Bobo, Holly's mother, who was a teacher at a local elementary school. She then called the house, spoke to Clint, the brother, who had just woken up, and he said he could hear Holly talking to what he thought was her boyfriend, Drew Scott, and it sounded like to him they were breaking up, so he didn't want to get involved. But then his mother informed him that Drew was hunting on the grandmother's property, their grandmother's property, that morning, and that was definitely not Drew to deal with it, get a gun and shoot him. And of course, Clint, being groggy, said, but he did promise to check it out. He hung up. He went downstairs. He found some drops of Holly's blood in the carport. He had his pistol with him. He then was able to see Holly walking toward the woods with somebody that he now recognizes was not Drew, was too tall, had long hair. None of those things fit Drew. And he was able to again talk to his mother and tell him what she saw. She told him to go try to find them, go after them, but to call 911, which both of them did. Karen Bobo had tried to call 911 from the school earlier, but unfortunately the school, because it was in a different county, rang into the wrong county, so she had to wait till she was en route home to make the call and have it placed into the correct county. By 8:30 that morning, the Bobo residence was crawling with police officers, TBI agents, sheriff's deputies, anybody you can imagine in law enforcement in a small unincorporated town like Darden, Tennessee. There wasn't a whole lot of investigating going on. They were just, seems to be setting up, blocking off the property, milling around, kind of going into the woods, but not really coming into the woods. So, in fact, Holly's father, Dana Bobo, got upset and basically told them, I don't care if you suspect my wife, my son, whoever, just ask us what we need to ask and then go find my daughter. He was just sick of them not doing anything. For the next 90, from about 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m., Holly's cell phone was seen tracking north away from the Bobo's residence. It disappeared for a while, then reappeared, nothing unusual with all the woods and the tree cover in Darden, Tennessee, and was tracking back closer to the Darden residence when it finally disappeared. Along the next few years, yes, you heard that right, years, till about September of 2014, little bits and pieces were beginning to unfold. They found Holly's lunchbox, her ID badge from school, some receipts. They finally found the SIM card and the cell phone from that day. And finally, in September of 2014, two men hunting for ginseng in the woods within a 20-mile radius of the Bobo residence found Holly's partial remains consisting of a shoulder blade, a skull, teeth, and some ribs. The skull had a bullet wound from the back of the head, which came out through the left cheek. So, a tragic end to a beautiful life. She was only 20 years old. From 2014 to where we're coming up to now in 2017, there were about 8 people that were considered suspects that were questioned. And of those, there were 4 that were actually arrested. And out of that, only 2 were ever charged. Terry Britt and Janet Britt, his wife, was a convicted sex offender living in the area who had an affinity for young blonde blue-eyed girls just like Holly. He also had no alibi and had a very sketchy description of how he would have carried out the kidnapping and murder of Holly Bobo that he told to TBI, but somehow he was cleared and never charged. Although there are a lot of TBI agents that swear it was probably him, but as I said, most of the evidence in this case, even the trial we're about to cover, was circumstantial. Also, the following were arrested: Dylan and Zach Adams. Dylan gave a confession in which he said that his brother Zach did kidnap and sexually assault Holly and then later on killed her. He later recanted that, saying that that confession was given under duress. You had Zach Adams, who has always said that he was 100% innocent of these charges. You had Shane Austin, somebody else who was offered immunity for a testimony he never gave. He was kind of harassed by police, so his family says, and he eventually committed suicide. Then you had Jason Autry, whose testimony, he was offered leniency, probably he served less than 5 years in prison for basically testifying against the Adams brothers, and it was his testimony that was paramount in the upcoming trial. So those are your suspects. Let's get into the trial. September 2017, Zach Adams was the first to go on trial. He pled 100% innocence in the case of Holly Bobo. He said he didn't know Holly, he didn't touch Holly, he's never touched Holly, and he's completely innocent of this. It was during this trial, and I'll insert a clip of it here.
But if this was the truth, we quickly learned it would be difficult to stomach.
The body didn't weigh very much.
Jason Autry is no stranger to courtrooms. He, like his one-time friend Zach Adams, is accused of killing, kidnapping, and raping Holly Bobo.
But I did not kidnap, I did not rape, and I did not kill Miss Bobo. And I did not. But I lied and said that I didn't have no details to it.
It was all so matter-of-fact today, poetic in a sense, as he laid out how he met Zach Adams to buy meth the day Holly went missing.
And he said, I need you to help me bury this body.
In the back of a pickup truck, he told jurors, was Holly.
The body was laying in a multicolored farm blanket.
The plan, Autry testified, drive to the Tennessee River, gut the nursing student's body, and throw her in so she wouldn't float.
And I grabbed the upper torso of Miss Bobo. Zach come around, let the tailgate down. I brought the upper torso to the end of the tailgate.
But Holly wouldn't be dumped in the river that day. She was still alive.
I see the foot move, a movement, and a sound of distress that sound like, come out of her voice, come from the blanket.
Autry then told jurors that Zach went into his pickup truck and grabbed a gun.
Boom! The gun sounded, the gun went off.
One shot. If true, the testimony would be consistent with a medical examiner showing a bullet hole in Holly's skull. The most shocking
that Jason Autry's testimony was so important. And remember, this testimony was offered for almost 100% immunity in being charged in this case. And basically his testimony centered around what has come to be known as the bridge story. Basically it goes like this. He arrived at the home of Zach Adams to see a body wrapped in a blanket lying in the back of Zach Adams' white truck. That was another piece of circumstantial evidence that was used because Zach Adams drove a white truck. The neighbor who heard the scream that morning said that he saw a white truck drive away from the property. So, a body lying in there. He saw Zach, Dylan, and Shane throwing stuff into a burn barrel. He could only assume it was the possessions of the person wrapped in that blanket. Now, Jason admits he had gone over there to buy drugs, remember? Dylan, Zach, and Shane were small-time criminals. They were drug dealers, so it was nothing unusual for people to come to one of their homes looking for drugs. So, He saw this going on. Zach asked him for some assistance. He said, if you'll help me with this, I'll give you some drugs. So he got into the truck with Zach, and they drove off toward the Tennessee River at an I-40 overpass, the Interstate I-40. And he basically, along the drive, told Jason, that's Holly Bobo back there. We got to get rid of the body. And so he was wanting to know what to do. He said, let's bury her. Well, Jason said that there were no pickaxes or shovels in the back of the truck, so how could they bury a body? So they decided to change course a little bit and drove toward the river, where it was Jason's idea to gut her like a deer, throw her into the Tennessee River, which was murky and dirty, and when she was hollowed out like that, she would fill up with water and sink to the bottom, and the turtles and fish would finish the job. Those were his exact words. They got there. They immediately took the body out to put it on the ground to begin preparing for what they were about to do, when Jason heard a moan come from the blanket and saw a foot move. So he realized, or he said at that point, Holly Bobo was still alive, and he told Zach to deal with it. Zach told him to go up to the head of the road to make sure no one was coming. Jason did that. He signaled, and he heard a single shotgun or single pistol shot ring out, indicating that Zach had finished off Holly, supposedly. Now, he said that with the echo that was in the holler there, and a holler is kind of like a tunnel through the woods there, and then you've got the overpass, which is concrete and steel, which is going to have an echo. He said it sounded, that one gunshot echoed at least 6 times, and so he really thought people around them had heard, even though there was no one around. So they immediately ran back, they put the body back in the truck, and they sped off. Zach dropped Jason off where he could walk back to his vehicle, and he said he would deal with it. And then, of course, we know about 3 years after that, Holly's decomposed body was found in the woods, not buried at all, just left there. The main narrative put forth at this trial by the prosecution was that the two Adams boys, Zach and Dylan, and Shane Austin, had gone to the Bobo residence to teach Clint Bobo, Holly's brother, the one that there was so much controversy about why he didn't act fast enough to save his sister, teach him how to make methamphetamine. And
Shocking part of the day, though, when Autry said Zach Adams went to Holly's house the day she was kidnapped to visit her brother.
The real reason that we were there was to show Clint how to manufacture meth. He said we got there early. She come outside screaming and raising hell.
They came here seeking the truth today. No one knew, though, that this is what we'd hear. Quite a day that still isn't over. You are looking live inside the courtroom right now.
That's why they were on the Bobo residence that early. That was what was given by prosecution. Clint Bobo and Dana and Karen Bobo, the parents, adamantly deny this. It has never been proven, but that was what the prosecution alleged. And at that point, according to the testimony of Dylan Adams, who was the confession he gave and then later recanted, that she came out screaming and hollering when she figured out what her brother was up to, and they had to get rid of basically a risk to them all getting arrested, and that's why Clint did nothing. He knew his sister had to go because she was going to get them all arrested. So that was the very sinister narrative that was put forward. However, all of this was circumstantial. It was he said, she said. Remember, all of these men on trial had lower IQs. They were already small-time criminals in the community. And also, the judge on the case, and you can read up on him, was kind of weird in the way that he carried on at the trial. He even offered, now this jury had been selected from about 3 counties. The jury was supposed to be sequestered, meaning kept away from everyone. But during the trial, and I'll insert a clip of it here, the judge actually offered to take all of the jurors to a local football game to get them out of the hotel for a while. It was just very weird.
was biased against the defendant.
You've got accusations by the defense that the judge was not being fair to the defendant, may have even thought that the defendant was guilty, may have even insinuated that the defendant was guilty.
And whether he got too familiar with the jurors.
Do we have any Hardin County Tiger football fans? Wow. We might see if we can get you folks out there in the presence of guard. You understand, you'll be isolated, but probably could put you on the visitor side. We play south side. If you want to go, there should be adequate place in this visitor side where we can put you without danger of exposure.
The judge is talking about
the way this trial went down, and that was what the Adams defense attorney contended, that her clients could not get a fair trial and anywhere near Darden, Tennessee, because of their already reputations. But their reputations does not make them murderers. That's what she contended. And all of them have contended that they were innocent. And then the rest of the narrative was that after they took Holly off to dispose of her, they raped her in a local barn owned by Shane Austin's grandmother, and then they shot her and disposed of the body. And all of this was very circumstantial. There was no DNA evidence. There was really no eyewitnesses except for Clint seeing Holly walk into the woods and the neighbor hearing a scream. But yet they brought in all of these witnesses that kind of was a he said, she said type of thing, talking about how Clint was wanting to learn to make meth, and how Zach and Dylan had spoken about the murder of Holly Bobo and even threatened ex-girlfriends by saying you'll end up like Holly Bobo if you don't be quiet. Just a lot of different circumstantial evidence. And then the strange behavior of the judge at the trial. It was just weird. More circumstantial evidence was that 2 pieces of paper, receipts belonging to Holly, were found 75 feet from where Shane Austin lived. He and Zach Adams both drove white trucks, and the neighbor that had reported seeing a white truck leaving the Bobo residence that morning. One of the ex-girlfriends, Rebecca Earp, did testify that Shane said that he would tie me up just like he did Holly Bobo and no one would ever see me again. That was evidence. And there were other people that were kind of anti-character witnesses that came forward that testified against the men, specifically Zach, who is on trial right now. And finally, a .32 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver was found in the Tennessee River by a local man named Victor Dinsmore. The police contended that this was the murder weapon of Holly Bobo, and that the gun was actually traded for drugs between a couple of residents, and that it was found underwater in the Tennessee River, evidently to get rid of it. Again, no fingerprints, no DNA. There was no bullet ever recovered from the body because, again, it was decomposed. This entire trial was circumstantial. It was alleged by Zach Adams' defense attorney that this was just an effort of the town to make people feel safe again, that they wanted a conclusion to this trial, this case that had drug on for about 5 years, 6 years at this time. And they were so deadpan on getting a conviction that they created a case. That was her contention. And it worked, because the jury found Zach Adams guilty on all charges: first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated rape. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and to 25 years consecutive 25-year sentences. And he's in jail today. Dylan Adams, who, remember, eventually told a totally different story than what was presented at trial, but then recanted that, saying he did it under duress, entered an Alford plea, which, if you don't know what an Alford plea is, it's basically where you agree to plead guilty to something, but then you maintain your innocence. It's very weird. I don't understand it, but he was allowed to that. He's not admitting guilt, but he is pleading guilty. That's what an Alford plea is. So he pled guilty and was sentenced to 15 years and also another 20 years for accessory, and he will be serving about 35 years of that sentence before he gets parole. Shane Austin had committed suicide, so there was no way he could be held accountable. Terry Britt was never charged. Jason Autry, the key witness for the prosecution, who was offered almost complete immunity in exchange for his testimony, was released with time already served. And there you have the case of Holly Bobo. Do I believe they have the right guy? I don't know, but I do think that it's more likely that perhaps Terry Britt, just like several TBI agents said, it's more likely he's the perpetrator, it's his MO, than these small-time drug dealers, because no one really believed the whole story about Clint Bobo wanting to sell drugs. That was just the story put forth by the prosecution. I believe this was rushed. People wanted a conviction. They wanted closure in this case, and they were given that. It was just a very weird trial from start to finish. And I do believe that perhaps an innocent man is sitting in jail and the real perpetrator is still out there. I don't know. Just my opinion. I don't know. But one thing I think we forget in all the hubbub about this trial, that a very young 20-year-old woman with her life ahead of her lost her life. And for those of you watching on video here is her grave marker. That's what we need to remember. That she's the real victim of this. Not these men, not Terry Britt, not the citizens of Darden, but her and her family. And I can only wish them the best. And that I hope that whatever happened in this case, it brings them the closure and the ability to move forward in life. And that's why I do these videos, to try to put forth some understanding and help people to remember that it's really the victims that we need to be feeling sorry for. Anyway, that's the conclusion of the Holly Bobo trial. I'll be back later this week with more true crime. Thank you so much. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Keto Comic, out.